The storms that came after the long night were stranger than any men could recall. Winds dragged sheets of green fire across the horizon at dusk, as if the sky remembered the sorcery that once split it, and the sea sang in two voices, a deep old groan tangled with some thin, cutting whistle that put teeth on edge. In those months, roads washed out and bridges sagged, and everywhere the land smelled upturned, as if all Westeros had been plowed and sown with new seed. It was in that season that Jon Snow came down from the haunted forest with a dragon shadowing him like a cloud. The beast was not Drogon. It was smaller, smoke-dark with a pale scar running from the left jaw to the breastbone, a long-healed wound that flashed silver when the light struck it. Its wings were patchwork where old rents had knit crookedly. When it exhaled, the heat shimmered the snow around the hooves of Jon's horse, turning the crust to water and then to ice again. Its eyes were the color of wet coal. It had no name yet. He did not come alone. 60 free folk moved at his back like a river broken into channels. Hunters with white-fletched arrows, women with knives sewn into their sleeves, a bare-shouldered raider with pale hair and eyes like clear morning. Ghost paced ahead, ears high, tail swaying low. Between them all walked a bent man in a patched maester's chain, hands black with soot, who had taken it upon himself to cart a satchel of broken wheels and cogs, trophies from the shattered wildling traps. He spoke softly to the dragon and fed it bones he had boiled brittle. He was called Clydas, for he claimed he once knew a man by that name and wished to wear something like it again. At the gate of Winterfell, the watchman hardly knew him. Jon had grown thinner and harder, and a white streak had cut through the black at his temple. When the dragon dropped onto the battlement, the stone rang like a bell and the old tower windows shook. The guards fell to knees without meaning to. The dragon's breath steamed and hissed, and the rime melted down the crenels like tears. Sansa came out into the yard wrapped in wolf gray and white. Her hair was the color of old copper coins, and a circlet of pale metal sat on her brow with all the ease of a well-fitted suit of mail. Behind her came 7 very tidy men whose boots made the same sound on the mud, and 2 women whose faces might have been carved of walnut wood. When she saw Jon, something in her jaw unclenched and her breath stuttered. Then she was down the steps and crossing the yard, her hand out, her mouth shaping his name. He bowed his head and she embraced him, and he the more stiffly than he wished. Ghost shouldered in and licked her glove. The dragon watched it all with the damp, curious solemnity of a calf. "Gods," Sansa murmured. "Where did you, Jon, what is it to you?" He said, because he had turned the words over in his mouth for 3 days, "It's mine." Sansa's eyes climbed the dragon's body as if it were a tower with a light at the top. "Daenerys, not hers, not Drogon's, a wild one. I found it near the smoking shore, west of Hardhome. It had almost died in the snow. I don't know how far north it flew before the cold began killing it." He looked up as the dragon flexed its wings, and the cords in his neck stood out. "It shouldn't be here, but it is, and I think I know why." Clydas, absurd and brave with his satchel of scrap, bowed so low his beard touched his knees. "Your Grace," he called Sansa, though Jon had asked him not to. "This creature has the old fire in it, but it also has the new hunger. There are bones east of Eastwatch. There are shells on the snow where shellfish cannot creep. The world has been stirred. Even dragons have wandered onto white pages where they were never meant to be written." When Sansa had led them in and the dragon had folded itself on the shattered yard where the dead weirwood once cast shadow, they sat in the great hall with the big hearth burning hot and steady. The roof smelled of new tar and pine and the fresh iron of repaired braces. Men in stark gray drank quietly and watched Jon's hands and Sansa's face. Arya sat half in the smoke, her legs tucked under her like a cat's, so still Jon did not see her at first. When he did, she tilted her head and smiled with one corner of her mouth, and he felt something ease in him, some string untied. "You've brought a war," she said, soft enough to be a jest if he wished. Jon looked at his cup. "I want to bring an ending." Sansa's fingers touched the rim of her own cup and then left it again. "An ending to what?" she said, and there it was, the iron that Daenerys had once called hard as any queen's. Sansa had grown into something that did not need a throne to claim a room. The wheel, Jon said. All the spokes. The lords and their names and their sons and their sons' sons who think the land is theirs because someone gave it to their great-grandsires for the blood of men already forgotten. The houses that chew us up and spit us out and live on. I have seen it from the bastard side and from the lord's side. It is the same wheel, only the sky looks different. We break it or it breaks everything else. Arya had not moved. With a dragon. If I must. A wind moved through the hall then. The wet bone smell of the dragon even here. Sansa's eyes flicked up as if to a sound over the roof. Her voice was careful. What did you learn beyond the wall, Jon? That we keep building the same rules over our graves. That the snow remembers every footstep, and still we walk it like no one came before. That a Ser is not a person. Neither is a lady. We are only men and women who die. The Night King taught me that, and so did Daenerys, and so did our father. He swallowed on the word father like it was a stone that still had edges. I loved a woman who wanted to break the wheel. She did it with fire that ran ahead of her heart. I would do it with fire that runs behind. Démine. Sansa's laugh was almost silent. That is pretty, for a man who does not think himself a prince. I never said. You don't have to. Your dragon will say it for you. She was looking not at him but into the fire. You think to end noble houses. That includes this one. Jon realized his fingers had tightened around the cup so hard his knuckles burned. He forced them to ease. If there are no houses, there is no House Stark. The words tasted of ash in his mouth. He had not said them to himself that way yet. There are people, free folk, small folk, who want to live without being owned. There will be councils chosen to tend things for a time. Stewards, not lords. A new oath to replace the old. We've been ruled by names. I want us to choose by faces. Arya's knife flashed. She was paring something no one could see. Her voice was mild as rain. And what happens when men with long memories decide they do not want to vanish into a crowd of faces? They'll fight, Jon said. And you'll burn them. I will do what I must to keep the world from bleeding out through holes that were cut before I was born. Sansa set her cup on the table with a sound like a small bell. You will do what you must, she echoed. You always were like that. Killed you once. He remembered the knives, the cold, the strange peace of the dark, the weight of ghost across him when breath returned. He remembered Daenerys' eyes when she understood herself alone. He remembered Bran's gaze when the boy was a man who had set his hand on a tree and watched 1,000 men kneel and rise and kneel again like a field of wheat in wind. Jon's mouth felt very dry. I'm not asking the North to bow to me, he said. I'm asking you to walk beside me while I ask everyone to stand up. Sansa leaned back, her shoulders finding their place against the chair like they had learned that shape. And when you come to Winterfell last of all, then I come home, he said, and he surprised himself by the way his voice broke on the word. It was Arya who stood, who came to him, who touched his face with a hand hard from the training yard. We only ever had one home, she said. Even when I wore other faces, I spoke it to myself. Winterfell, it is not the walls or the roof. It is the people who look at you and know you and still want you. You bring a dragon and you bring an ending and you bring yourself. I will walk with you. I will walk where you cannot. Sansa's eyes closed briefly, and when she opened them they were wet and bright. You will bring war to my gate, she said. But the war will not start here. They made their plans with maps that still had old borders inked on them and with tokens carved from antler and oiled wood. They sent ravens south with letters that said there would be an assembly at King's Landing in 1 month's time, under a dragon's shadow and the memory of a melted throne. Any who came would be heard. Any who refused would be left to their people's choosing. The first resistance came quicker than letters could fly. A cousin to a Lannister who had a cousin who'd survived the sack of the city gathered a host at the Rock and sent out a rider with a white pennon to demand oaths of all the small castles of the Westerlands. He called himself Steward of the West, but the riders who went by night with Jon's letters brought another name for him from the small folk, the last lordling. The Westerlands were sour with lost gold and torn canals. Some said the mines were cracked down to hell and let up breath you could light with a flint. The last lordling promised bread. The small folk looked at his flags and thought of the taxes those flags had cost them. Then they looked east and saw black wings. Many stayed home. John split the north by choosing not to command. He asked, and enough said yes to make an army. They were not banners. They were people in coats of fox and lamb and marten, and men whose fathers had swung hammers in Carhold, and women who rode the shaggy little horses left wandering after the winter slaughters. They moved like a flood along the green fork, ghosts of reeds in their hair, and the dragon flew above them like a slow thundercloud. Where they passed, the watchmen on the walls found their hands slipping from their spears. No one wanted to be the first to kill for a title no one could eat. At the twins, there were no Freys left who mattered. The stones had a sulky look. The mortar stained old wine and old blood. John's host camped in the fields east of the crossing, and he rode up to the barbican and cupped hands to mouth and spoke without herald or horn. "Open," he called. His breath steamed. "We are not here to take your lives." An old man in a stained red hood leaned out of a murder hole like a worm from an apple. "What are you here for then?" "The bridge," John said, "because simplicity is a kind of mercy. And the names you've held it for." He lit no fires that night. Instead, he walked with Ghost beside the river and watched the dragon sleep with its head on folded forelegs like an enormous dog. The stars were a spill on black velvet. Somewhere behind him, Arya played at knives with a boy from the Dreadfort who had never seen an ocean and a girl from Barrowton who had never seen a wall. Sansa's tent had a light in it and the shadows of two heads moving, hers and Brienne's. John thought of what Kat had told him once, when he was very young and she had believed speaking to him could be a kind of penance. You will never be allowed to forget who you are. He thought of telling her she had been both right and wrong. At dawn, the Fry gate swung up. The old man in the red hood had the look of someone who had slept through too many decades and woken up to find the bed burning. He handed John a key large enough to brain a man. "Go on then," he said hoarse. "Take it. It's killed enough of us." John took the key and did not take the castle. He stood in the gate and said to the men above, "You're so. Ines and daughters will choose who tends the crossings year by year. If your work is good, they'll choose you. The name Fry is not your food. You'll eat on the work of your hands or you won't eat at all." The old man spat. The phlegm was streaked with red. "And you, Snow? What do you eat on?" John looked up to where the dragon had landed on the west tower and left a print in the stones like a monstrous hand. "On what you do tomorrow," he said, and a murmur ran through the men above as if a cold finger had traced their spines. The west went badly and then worse, the way a wound that looks clean goes sour beneath the skin. The last lordling had friends enough in old debtors and new priests, and when John's letters called for an assembly, the priests went among the tents and cottages telling men that assemblies were only another word for riot. In two small towns, men who had carried water for lions now carried cudgels for God. In a vineyard that no longer bore fruit, a woman in yellow led a dozen with sickles to ambush 3 of John's riders and cut their ears off to warn against treason. They left the ears in a bowl on a boundary stone. John went there with Ghost and the dragon and 6 men who had no banners. He spoke to the woman in yellow as the dragon crouched behind him, and the morning mist lay like unwashed wool on the vine's dead arms. "Do you know my name?" he asked her. "I know the names of the dead," she said. "I'm not one of them," John said. "Yet." "No," the woman said, "but you bring them with you." He could not deny it. "I bring an ending. You bring a wanting," she said, and her voice was not unkind. "I have wanted. I have stood on hilltops and looked at the rock when I was a girl and thought of other worlds that could be built out of the stones of this one. But men are not stone. They do not stack so neat. You will take our names and we will put them back on like shirts when your dragon sleeps. Then I will teach you to sleep without them." She smiled faintly. "I am too old to learn to sleep naked." He could have burned her. The dragon could have made a kiln of the valley and glazed the bowls with the souls of men. He did not. He brought the bowl with the ears into the town square and set it on a table, and he ordered the boundary stones turned into millstones for grinding common grain. He asked the old men to tell the stories of the harvests under lords and the harvests under weather. He asked the priests what their God wanted of them when their God's servants were hungry. He asked the boys what they wanted to see when they stood on hills and looked at the rock. When he was done, he left them no oath. He left them an invitation to King's Landing and the right to choose a steward for one season's weather. He left a paper with a stamped wolf's head that promised grain from the north if the western stores ran out. He left the dragon perched on the old boundary wall for 3 days, the way a farmer leaves a scarecrow in a field. After, men with sickles came to the camp carrying loaves wrapped in cloth. The woman in yellow stood in her doorway with her hands folded and her mouth a thin line straight as a blade. There was war all the same. It unfurled like a hard winter, slow and then all at once. Manderly cousins who had wanted the old songs back raised spears against a levy from Fair Isle. A band of orphaned knights from the Reach, boys with green lions sewn crookedly on brown cloth, charged a line of peasants on the Gold Road and were turned back by a storm of stones. The Ironborn tried to test the dragon with fire arrows and barrels of oil lashed together, and the dragon taught their ships the taste of their own smoke. At night song, a lord 2 strokes from poverty tried to wedge open a new house with the edge of a black blade and died under the hooves of his own old horse. The raven's teeth of Raventree Hall came to John wanting command, and he told them there would be no command to give, only work to share. Some bowed, some spat. Arya, in a dirty hood with a laugh in her eyes that was not soft at all, marked 3 spitting men and taught them a silence they had not believed they could keep. King's Landing had not grown another throne in the months since the last one ran like a river of knives and hardened into a slagged hill. There were markets in the shadow of the Red Keep that sold melted iron as amulets and charms. Children ran on the steps of the September that had been, and their mothers called them back, softly like a song, like they had called their own mothers once on other steps. The city was a mouth that had been broken and now learned to chew with new teeth. The assembly met in the dragon's shadow because John had chosen a place at the foot of Aegon's high hill, and the dragon had chosen the roof of the old Guildhall of Chandlers to watch from. Representatives came because they were afraid not to, and they came because they were curious, and they came because stories travel faster than banners. The Vale sent 3, a sly-eyed man with slim hands, a woman with milk teeth still around her smile, a woodsman whose boots had the smell of pine pitch. Dorne sent a girl with copper bangles and eyes that had watched too many funerals. The Westerlands sent the last lordling with a sword too fine for his hand and a priest with a voice that could smooth wood. The Riverlands sent a dozen smallholders who had stopped the mouths of their wives with bread and promises. The North sent Sansa and Brienne and a handful of men who called themselves Reeve and Yearman and Road Warden, for those would be the titles now if they took. The Iron Islands sent no one, which was a way of sending a knife in a letter. John stood on a plank on 2 ale barrels because the Guildhall had been stripped for other needs, and he did not want to speak from any stone that might be mistaken for a dais. He wore a plain black surcoat and no crown. When he raised his hand, the city's noise bent around the S. Islands like a river around a rock. "I have come to end your names," he said, and the murmur rose and broke and rose again like a flock. He waited. His voice, when it came again, was rough with sleep taken in bits and set aside. "Not the names your mothers gave you, the names your swords gave you, the names that buy bread for you whether or not you have done any work to earn it. We will replace them with duties any man or woman can pick up and set down and be thanked for doing well." The last lordling made the mistake of stepping forward like a man at court. He bowed the way his father had taught him to bow to a king. "And who will make these duties, Snow?" "You." He smiled as if he meant to share a joke about bastardry. "We have all seen a Targaryen speak pretty words and ride a dragon like another man rides a horse. We have all seen what their love makes of cities." John did not look up to the dragon, though he heard the scrape of its claws on tile and felt the shift of the crowd's attention like a wind change. "No," he said, "I will not make the duties. You will. The city is a body, and a crowd is a lung." In that moment, the assembly inhaled. Sansa, standing to his left, did not move at all, which was a way of making every man in the square aware of her. "I have lived as a bastard in a lord's house," John said. I have stood with vows in my mouth and watched them turn into knives in other men's hands. I have walked with free folk who do not know a warden from a wall. I am no one's king. I am the last argument of a bad world. I will not decide how you live. I will only burn what will not let you live. That night there was no feast. There were pots on stones, and there were hands that tore loaves and dipped them, and there were children who ran between ankles and dogs that slunk between hands. In the dark under the Guildhall roof, John looked at the city and tried to feel the thing he had once felt, that wild sweetness, when he and Daenerys had stood on a wall and believed themselves makers of mornings. He could not. The sweetness had been a lie, but some lies are the only bridges to true things. Do you think this will work? Arya asked him later, lying on her back on the stones, her feet near the fire, her hands behind her head like a boy at rest. She had a smear of ash on her jaw she had not noticed. No, he said. Yes, I don't know what work means anymore. It took 10,000 men 100 years to learn to take their hats off for a lord. It might take as long to teach them to keep them on. I can help with the ones who want to keep the hats on other heads. He turned toward her, the fire through the they of her nose and the sharpness of her cheek into soft relief. I don't want you to kill half the world for me. Not for you, Arya said, amused. For me. For the next girl who wants to eat with both hands. He wanted to tell her he had seen too much blood, that he woke some nights certain he could taste copper in his mouth and find none there. He wanted to tell her he had learned that you cannot cut a root by plucking at the leaves. He just said, "Be careful." And when he heard her laugh softly, he felt again the way he had when they were children and he had hidden outside the kitchen to slip bread to her because she had been late to supper and the Septa had scolded her for muddy boots. The Ironborn came under moonlight, their sails smeared with something that drank the starlight and made them look like pieces of night torn free. Their oars were scalloped with leather to muffle their knock. They had buckets of oil and ropes with hooks and knives with weighted hilts for throwing. They came up Blackwater Bay like memories of a raid, and the dragon woke from a sleep that was not sleep at the first stink of fish tar and spite. It lifted its head and showed its teeth, and the moon fell in them like a coin in a slot and glinted there. John woke to bells, not the old bells of the great September, the little ones, strung at doorways and over carts to warn in narrow turns, the ones women tied on their toddlers' wrists when the markets were crowded. Thousands of little alarms, making a city-wide music of fear. He ran. So did half the assembly, dragging shirts over heads as they went. The dragon unfurled itself from the Guildhall roof like a banner and dropped into the square with a shock of wind that broke a dozen lamplights. Its breath was a thin white stream that grew orange, then gold, then invisible, then a sheet of heat that punched the face like a fist. The first 4 ships went up like tinder, and then the wind shifted and threw smoke in the dragon's face, and men on the 5th ship loosed their hook ropes and caught the beast's left wing where the old scar ran, and a rain of sparks came sweeping up the quay as the dragon jerked and bellowed. The rope burned. It held. 3 men on the quayside hauled and braced and set their heels, and a 4th, a boy with hair like straw, twisted the rope over a mooring peg. The dragon stumbled, one wing lower than the other, and its body carved a trench in the cobbles. The smell was terrible and the sound worse. It was an old world weeping. John had Ghost on one side and Arya on the other and the bay in front of him. He drew Longclaw and gave orders without knowing he had spoken until men and women were moving, hauling barrels, breaking up carts, slinging sand. The Ironborn came ashore where the dragon had fallen, because death makes men brave when they think it is not theirs. They sang. They always sang. It was a thin sound under the screaming metal of the peg and the low thunder of the dragon's breath deepening past pain into fury. Sansa had Brienne at her shoulder and a spear in her hand. She looked no queen and no lady at all, red hair unbound and gown hitched high, and it made something in John ache with a pride bigger than anything he had learned from Banners. "Hold," she said, and the word ran down the quay. "Hold," and it ran back, "Ho, LD." And men who would never have looked at her twice before the winter set their shoulders square to the water. When the rope burned through, it snapped with a sound like a struck drum. The dragon rolled with its whole body, a movement as ugly as it was strong, and crushed 2 ironborn under its hip. It got its feet under it, breathed like a bellows full of knives, and then it did a small, peculiar thing. It stepped carefully over a boy who had fallen and lay with his hands over his head, curled like a seed. Jon saw that and knew more surely than ever that the creature's will and his were not the same. He could ask. He could not fully command. The Ironborn, bleeding smoke and rage, rode into the dark with their dead as cargo and left behind a city awake, an assembly with soot on its hands, and a dragon with a new scar. In the morning, the copper-bangled girl from Dorne stood and said, "You have an enemy that will never choose a steward. What will you do with men who do not come to our table? How do we end houses if they live on the sea?" Jon wiped ash from his mouth with the back of his hand and tasted salt. "We don't end what we can't end," he said. "We teach it to end itself. We'll take their islands when the wind is wrong for them and the dragon is strong. We'll put mills on their successes and granaries on their docks. We'll drown them in trade and work and wives, until the thing they call the old way is just a story to make boys row harder." The last lordling did not speak. The priest with him had lost his voice from shouting prayers by the water and only croaked. But when the assembly broke that day at noon to drink and piss and weep and curse, the last lordling sent a runner who never reached the rock. Arya met him at the city gate, and he turned back and she followed him. And in the alley where he had kissed his lover under a broken arch, she stood behind him for a count of 10 and then tapped his shoulder. He turned, and she set a kiss on his brow and let him run again. He left his plans behind in his panic. Sometimes mercy is a different way of taking a thing. The Hightowers of Oldtown had not sent anyone, which was a kind of answer, and 3 days after the Ironborn raid, when the dragon's wings still stank faintly of herbs and rendered tallow, the beacon on the high tower lit at noon. It was a message none could pretend to misunderstand. Oldtown had declared noon to be midnight. The faith would hold convocation. Men would be crowned with vows. House would bless house. There would be no assembly there, only a cathedral of old names. "Then we must go," Sansa said, and there were lines at the corners of her mouth that had not been there a week before. They went like traders with carts and seed and blacksmiths and singers. Jon did not want rails of spears in the sunlight. He wanted roads. The dragon flew, a thick, wounded silence in the sky. When they came near to the Mander, the water was a long brown hand with green nails, and it smelled of life, and the fields were the first he had seen in years that looked ready to forgive. Oldtown met them like an old man with a cudgel. The ring walls were neat, the tower straight as a prayer. Bells spoke. Men in 7-colored cloth filed into the shadow of ash-gray domes. The citadel stood with its books like stacked shields. Jon felt small in the face of it, as small as he had felt on the wall as a boy. He had loved books once as if they were secret doors. Now he looked at the closed doors of knowledge and felt only the old fury that wakes in men when others hoard bread. They set their camp on a long meadow that had once been used for tourneys. The ground remembered hooves. Arya rode the lines and measured distances and pointed to a ditch that had held the old lists and said, "Here." And they dug a fire trench that looked like a laugh drawn in the grass. Sansa had a platform built from hurdles and a barrel and a plank, just as in King's Landing. And when the light took the tower like a candle and noon turned to a false midnight, Jon climbed and stood and spoke. "Come out," he called to the walls. "We came with grain. We came with work. We came with what you say are sins. We came with choices. Come out and choose." The first to come were children, because hunger is a low bell that children always hear. They came in 2s and 3s and then a brave 6, and they took loaves the way hands learn to take when they have never been slapped away. Then came women who had watched sun become fire and understood symbols better than men who made them. Then came a scribe who had been a boy once when Balerian's skull still stared in a dark room in the city, and his hands shook so badly when he reached for a cup that he spilled, and a girl who had become a novice at 12 and a bride of the gods at 13 and a widow of vows at 15. Then came a maester with a link half-painted and half-earned, and a hedgehog farmer with his hedge already burning back on the Mander, and 2 sailors who had promised each other marriage in a place where that promise could not be heard. Then men who had thought they would never move. Then, last, the Hightower's steward, his hands held out palm up empty, to show he brought nothing and asked for everything. In the end, the Faith's convocation was held with an assembly ringing it like surf. The High Septon spoke words that were very old, and John listened to their shape with patience he did not entirely feel. Then he asked the High Septon his own question. What is mercy when a lord has his hand on a child's throat? The High Septon was a boulder of a man, with eyes like two leftover beads. Mercy is asking him to take his hand away, and when he does not, then justice is cutting it off. And if he has 100 cousins who will grow hands for him? John asked. The High Septon hesitated, and his mouth opened and closed, and he said, Then we pray for rain. And for the first time John liked him a little. They did not burn the high tower. John had imagined it in the deep of night a dozen times, the way a man imagines opening a vein to see if the poison will run out and the blood run sweet again. He imagined the beacon falling and sending fire down in a sheet that would glaze the cobbles and seal away old ghosts. He imagined a world with one less pillar for men to lean against. He did not do it. He climbed the tower with the steward, and he took the key to the beacon, and he turned it in the lock and made noon again. He said into the wind with his hand on the parapet stone, You will call your keepers stewards, and they will be chosen each year by those who haul water and clean the bird droppings from the high ladders. The steward, sweating in the high light, said, And if they choose badly, they will choose again. And if they choose the same as I, then do better than you have, John said. The work after that was less like war and more like winter. It had to be done, and it never finished. And there were days when he thought he had been born just to count and measure and sign and listen, and then to hold a quiet meeting when the day was done and the river hummed below. Men who once had ridden into battle now rode between villages with a bag of clay seals and a leather folder of charters. And women who had stood at windows watching for banners now stood in doorways and asked what date the next choosing would be held. The old names grew thin on the tongue like a broth boiled too long. The new ones were not handsome, but they were useful. Reeve and yearman and road warden, salt steward and grain counter and millwright, candle keeper and midwife chosen and hearth warden. In 2 years, there were more midwives sitting at tables where only men had sat before than anyone would have bet their firstborn on. Babies were born under the eyes of women who now had voices in the hall. Some of the babies' names were old ones. Some were new. There were no more little boys called Lannister in the first year in the West. There were 3 little girls called Mercy. Of course, there were men who would not yield. The last lordling tried again and then again, and the third time he came to Casterly Rock at dusk with a cloak full of knives and a heart full of beautiful words. He meant to cut his own hand on the rock and say a blessing and be made a tale. He died on the rock steps of a fever that had nothing to do with knives. Men said the rock itself took him. John set no guard to stray men's poems. Others came with armies. A Manderley cousin with a bright banner tried to take White Harbor back for the old pride and found the gates open and the streets full of women with mops and lads with broomsticks and sailors with oars. They tripped him and kissed his cheeks and took his horses for the work carts and sat him down and gave him stew and told him about weirs and tariffs till his eyes went red with tears of boredom. He went home with scraps of ribbon in his hair and could not make men gather to him again without blushing. Not all endings were kind. In a valley near the neck, a man with old blood in him took a dozen boys into the marsh and taught them the names of old gods and sent them to cut throats for a banner no one had saluted in 40 years. Arya and 2 women from Barrowton and a boy from Skagos went and found them and did what had to be done with knives and ropes and a small fire. John did not ask which of them had cried when it was done. He only asked whether the valley wanted a reed weir built to catch fish in lean months, and when they said yes, he sent men with plans and boys with shovels and a woman to teach fathers how to mend nets when the ice came. Bran came once, in a cart that moved with an uncanniness that made men give it room. He was quieter than John remembered him and more there at the same time. Birds followed him, black tags against the sky. He looked at the dragon for a long time without moving or blinking, and John felt the hair rise on his arms. "It is not yours," Bran said. His voice was a whisper of bark in wind. "I know, but it will go where you point until the day it does not." Bran's eyes were very blue, and they looked through John like he was glass. "Be sure, John. Be sure every time. Do you see how it ends? Everything ends, Bran said simply. The trick is not to leave a crack for the same thing to begin again. The last house to declare itself house was not one anyone would have counted at the start. It was a small place on the Mander, with a red mill and geese that had forgotten they were supposed to migrate. The Miller's family had called themselves Redwater since a boy had drowned there in their great-grandfather's time, and the river had been stained with his hair, and the fish had jumped in terror like arrows. They had never drawn a sword with their name in their mouths. They had never worn a color into war that could not be washed out. But men and women in far fields began to say Redwater when they spoke of a good mill and a steady hand and grain measured fair, and then they began to bring disputes to the miller with the thought that the word itself made a place, Redwater, where justice might be kneaded into dough. And then the miller's son, who had been learning to write under a hedge, put the word on a paper when he was asked his place at the assembly, and the word looked like a little flag in the short line of script. Someone else copied it, and then a third. Jon saw it on 3, then 7, then 12 charters. He went to the mill. He watched as the wheel turned and turned and turned, spilling water in silver streamers. He smelled the tang of wet wood and flour and the sour-sweet smell of the geese. He watched a woman with a scar on her lip lay 3 sacks on the floor and ask for measures of each, and he watched the miller measure and then take a scoop back off his measure to make it true. He watched the boy with the hedge school letters add D figures with his finger in flour on a plank. He watched them all and thought, here is a wheel we can keep. He asked the miller to come to the assembly, and he did, blinking like a man dragged out of sleep. Jon stood with him before the gathered and set the paper with Redwater at the top of it down on the plank between the barrels. You've made a house without meaning to, he said to the miller. The miller swallowed. We have not. You have, Jon said gently. Your name is spoken as a place where justice is expected. That is all a house ever was before it remembered itself wrong. The miller's wife stepped forward then, hands dusty white, hair stuck to her brow with sweat. Then if we are a house, she said, we are a house with a door. Anyone can come in. Anyone can leave. Anyone can put flour on the table and ask why it weighs less this week than last. The assembly laughed, and the boy from the hedge school smiled and pressed his finger into the flour on the plank like a seal. Sansa, at Jon's left, exhaled, and in that breath, he heard 100 things that had not been said since they were children, and everything hurt less because they did not know the names of it. Years slid. That was their trick. They did not clatter like coins or thunder like hooves. They slid, soft and deceitful, and men woke to look in a polished pan and ask when their beards had turned into their fathers. The dragon grew slow and then slower and then a little mean. It snapped at the maester's hand and left a mark there like a necklace not fully clasped. It stopped, lifting its left wing as high, and preferred the heat of the southern bricks to the comfortless clarity of northern snow. It took a calf and then a child's dog, and Jon paid for the calf and found the child 3 other dogs till she laughed again. Ghost grew thin and then thick again and lost some of his hearing and more of his patience. He slept with his nose on Jon's boot when Jon read charters and twitched and yipped in dreams that took him running across the old snow. They did not end houses with fire so much as they ended them with tedium. The work was a long fence built of little rails. There were no more banners in some places, and there were still in others banners hidden under beds like lovers. The faith learned a new language. The citadel learned to teach midwives' law. Children with no fathers' names learned to sign their mothers' names with pride. Children with 10 fathers' names learned to carry water up 2 flights without spilling. Sansa never wore her crown again. She kept it in a chest that had once held a lady's winter gowns, and sometimes Arya would take it out and put it on and make faces in a bronze dish filled with water, and Sansa would throw a rag at her and Arya would throw it back, and Brienne would smile and not say anything, and Jon would watch them like a man warming himself at a window in deep winter. When men asked what to call him, because men always ask what to call a man who makes them nervous, Jon said, nothing. When they demanded a name in a place where no one knew his face, he said, Steward. When that became its own kind of name, he said, Jon. When even that was too much, he pointed to Ghost and said, the wolf will do for me. The dragon did not care. It cared for warmth and meat and sometimes the particular attention of a man whose heart had burned and burned and still somehow had not eaten itself entirely away. He did not go to the God's Wood of Winterfell so often as he might have once. When he did, he sat under the new sapling with its pale leaves like hands that had not yet learned to hold, and he told it truths that would have sounded like lies in any other place. He told it he had loved and lost and loved again in other shapes, not women so much as worlds in the making. He told it he had broken and been put together and not in the same way. He told it that the snow had a different sound now when it fell in the workyards where men and women planed planks for bridges they would never cross. He told it he had helped end houses, and he told it he had helped begin one or two. Redwater, and another made of lanterns on the fingers where fishermen elected their own tide warden, and another of roadmenders who called themselves the 12 Stones because they had once lifted 12 stones out of a stream and made their first bridge and then had never stopped, and the word 12 Stones went from mouth to mouth in lands that had never had stones to hold them. In his last winter in the south, a boy asked him whether dragons remembered their eggs. The boy's hair was like dirty straw and his shoes had holes. Jon said, yes, though he did not know, and the boy nodded like this was what he had feared and took comfort in fearing it. When the dragon died, it did so without ceremony on a hill near Rosby. His breath went out like a lamp. Its eye, which had once reflected a city burning and made the city look like a small candle in a big room, went dull as old bronze. Jon set his hand on its side and felt how heavy the world is when it refuses to move again. They took its bones north because some traditions are worth keeping if you change the way you speak them. They were not like Balerian's bones. They were smaller and they did not look like a lesson. They looked like a life. In the crypts, where the air was full of the old iron smell, they laid the dragon's skull on a stone and set a candle in its mouth and watched the light shine out through the old sockets like a trick. Arya said, "It is a good joke." And Sansa laughed and then cried and did not hide it. And Jon put his forehead to the skull and felt the cool of bone that would not warm to any man's touch. "What have we done?" he asked the dark. And the dark gave him back all the voices who had asked it before. Outside, the snow began again, soft and deceitful. Inside, they ate stew and tore loaves and rested hands upon each other's shoulders and spoke why, without raising their voices. In the morning, men came to speak of bridges that needed their planks tarred before spring, and women came to ask whether the midwives' charters might be copied for villages farther west. And a boy brought papers signed with flour-dusted fingers from Redwater, and a girl with a small wolf carved from bone hung it by a thong at Ghost's neck, and Ghost tolerated it with dignity, and then shook until it clattered against the flagstones like laughter. If the wheel was broken, it was not in a single crack that men could stand around and cheer. It was in 100, 1,000 small fractures, each one made by a moment when someone decided not to bow and not to command and to do instead. It was in the way men said reeve as if it were a thing with teeth and not only a task, and in the way women said my weaver as if it were a title to be proud of and not a joke, and in the way children rolled their eyes when an old man said house and then asked what it meant and then, when he could not answer, went to fetch tools. Jon grew old without noticing and then all at once noticed and laughed aloud at the surprise of it. He walked with a stick sometimes and sometimes with nothing. He slept lightly and dreamed deeply. He stood under a leafless tree and looked up into branches that would be white come spring and green come summer and gold come fall and then bare again. And he thought, you can break a wheel and still something turns. It is not the same thing. That is the point. Let this turning be kinder. At last, he sat in the great hall with Sansa sleeping in a chair and Arya curled on the floor with Ghost's head on her hip, and the fire making a small song in the grate. And he set his stick across his knees and closed his eyes and listened for hoofbeats and banners and bells and heard instead the whisper of flour across a plank and the quick breath of a child in a doorway and the low murmur of a midwife saying push. He smiled. He breathed out. Snow fell. Somewhere far south, at a mill, a wheel turned and turned and turned. And if men, years later, told their sons that once there had been houses and dragons and a throne of knives, the boys shrugged and asked who would be road warden next year. And if their father said it would be them, they laughed and said, as it should be. The first sound that morning was a broom on stone. Jon woke to it and smiled even before his eyes were open, because the sound was an old promise kept. The small business of a world that had not fallen in the night. He rose, and his knee reminded him that some winter stayed in the bones, and he went without a cloak through the chill hall to the yard, where a girl with hair like fresh straw and ears too big for her head swept in circles. pushing last night's soot into a low black hill. "Morning," she said without awe, and bent double to scoop the pile into a pan. "Reeves says the wind's dry. He says if we don't keep the ashes down, they'll take wings and make fools of us." "He's right," John said, and took the pan from her and carried it to the midden. Steam rose when the ash hit and smelled like rain that had changed its mind. Arya was already at work in the yard, a stick in hand and a boy twice her size swaying opposite her with a dull wooden sword. She wore a plain tunic and old boots, and her hair was braided back carelessly. She moved like water when the earth is sloped and laughs at the idea of staying put. The boy, all limbs and breath, overreached. Arya flicked his stick aside, stepped into him, set her palm on his chest and pushed. He sat down hard and stared up at her with new respect and not a little love. "Again," she said, "but think with your feet before your hands." Sansa came out as the sun was making a weak attempt at being day. She had a shawl over her shoulders and a ledger under her arm. She yawned into her wrist and then caught sight of Jon and smiled in that soft, sudden way that knocked 10 years off her face. "You're up early. You've become a farmer. Farmers only sleep when the weather permits it." "I had a dream about Flower," Jon said gravely, "and about a mill wheel squealing. If I don't get there, it will haunt me all day." "You will not be a hero in this story," Sansa said, leafing through her ledger. "You will be a man who oils axles. It will gall the bards, but their gall is good for ink." They smiled like men who had swallowed coins and needed the weight. Jon wiped cheese from his fingers on a rag and looked at Clyda's, then at Sansa. "Braavos has a long memory and longer calculations. We owe them nothing, but they think we owe them the old shape of the world. If they cannot have a throne, they will settle for a rent roll. They'll look for those who miss the rent," Sansa said. "They'll sniff out men who grew high on the old tithes and haven't learned to breathe thin air. They'll find them," Arya said, coming in like a cat through any door, her stick now a length of ash smoother from a morning of work. "There are always men like that. Men who carry their own altars under their shirts and ask other people to bow before them." "We'll make them bored," Jon said. "It's the only true weapon. Give the Braavosi ledgerman a seat in the back at assembly. Let him listen to talk of ditch depths and tar, and send him to the 12 Stones roadmen to hear about gravel size until his ears become gravel." "He might stay," Clydas muttered, amused. "There are men who court boredom the way others court queens." "If he stays, he's been stolen," Arya said. "Better ours than Braavos." When the morning business was done and the ledgers closed, they went out to meet the men from Redwater who had walked the night to bring word. The miller's wife had sent her son, the boy with the flour-stained finger grown long and lean and more sure with numbers than most men with swords. He put his papers on the plank set on barrels and smoothed them with a tenderness that made Jon's heart catch. He pushed a curl out of his eyes and grinned at Sansa like a boy who remembers sneaking apples in a different season. "The river's sullen," he began. "It won't listen the way it did. The wheel's teeth have taken to slipping. We've oiled and shaved them and set the wedges true. But the river wants to remind us that it does not care about our schedules. We can get 3 days grind each week certain, and the other 4 are up for argument. We've set up small hand mills at the homes of 3 widows, your idea, Maester, and they're earning seed and more than seed. We've copied 6 charters for the South Fields. Also, there's a man from Old Brightwater Keep who refuses to pay in wheat and keeps bringing us jars full of eels." "Eels?" Arya repeated, delighted, and took the paper from his hand to read and hide a smile. "Good. We needed something with a sense of humor." "He thinks it's cunning," the boy said earnestly, "and some of them are bigger than my wrist, but they wriggle out of the jars if you leave them too long, and then everyone yells at me." He looked at Jon gravely. "Also, there's a man who is teaching the little ones to read with letters cut from leather. He says leather on the tongue stays longer than slate in the eye. He asked if there could be a charter for the leather letters, and whether he can call his shed a school without someone coming to claim he's built a September. He can call it what he likes," Sansa said, "so long as he can spell school." The boy nodded, satisfied, then hesitated. His finger made an involuntary small swirl on the paper, as if it missed flour. There have been whispers on the Mander. A man from the arbor came prying and asked questions about John, about a king. He said Greysail men promise gold to anyone who will put up a banner that looks like a branch with iron thorns. Old wine in a new skin, Brienne muttered. Greysail's a captain who read a book once, Arya said. He wants a song that rhymes with his name. He'll set a crown on a barrel if the barrel floats true, and he can hang his colors on it. Let him sing to himself, Jon said. We'll talk to the arbor in their own tongue. Send the Redwater boy to them with 3 charms that work and 1 that is false. They like guessing games. What charms? Sansa asked, amused. The kind that keep rats out of granaries, Jon said. Men always love what keeps other mouths from eating. The day went and came, a small tide. A woman from Barrowton told of a husband who wanted to call himself lord of his own hearth and had the bruises on her throat to argue the case. Jon sat with her under the eaves while it rained and said, "A house with a door, remember?" And that night, after a quiet talk and a trip to the granary and a visit from 2 road wardens with tired eyes, there was the sound of a man sleeping alone for the first time in 10 years in a shed that had once held tools and now held his pride. In the evening, Bran sent a raven with a strip of cloth knotted about its leg. The cloth had been torn from something fine once and worn, and the knot was clever. Arya undid it with her teeth. The message was less words than pauses, and Sansa read them like a seamstress reading the hem of a dress and knowing the story of the woman who wore it by the dirt and the tear and the mended place. "He asks you to come," she said to Jon. "Says there's a place in the neck that remembers too much and too loudly. Says if it is not asked to be quiet, it will gather old names by accident." "Do you see it?" Jon asked. "No," Sansa said, "but I see you. Go." He went with Ghost and 2 of the 12 Stones men and the Redwater boy who had never been farther than 2 days' walk from his mill and could not quite believe the world kept itself together over such distances without a reeve's hand. The neck greeted them with its old, patient rot, and the trees hung their old, green curtains, and the sky made a gray mouth and didn't talk much. The ground gave underfoot like a thought reconsidered. They walked on causeways that remembered feet in times when men had believed kings moved the sun, and they slept on islands that shifted their weight like women under blankets. They found Bran in a dry place shaped like a bowl, where 3 hills leaned upright like men who have been whispering and do not want to be seen to have been. He sat in his cart with a blanket over his knees and 3 crows on the rim like tassels black as any heraldic blazon. His face had thinned, until the eyes were the largest thing in it, and his hands lay quiet like birds that have chosen a branch. He looked not at Jon but through him and then past, and Jon felt the old sensation of being measured by an instrument no one else could see. "It is loud, isn't it?" Bran said, and he was not asking. "What is?" Jon asked, because sometimes Bran needed the sound of the question to place the answer properly. "The place," Bran said. "It is a cupboard full of kept voices. Your ending sent them running, but they found somewhere to sit. There's a hollow here where men piled their promises like driftwood for so long that even the mud remembers their weight. I need you to ask it to be quiet." "How?" Jon asked. "I only know how to burn and to build. Sometimes that is what quiet is," Bran said amiably. "You wedge a door or you sand a hinge. Sometimes you take the door off and let the wind blow through, and after a time the room forgets it had a door and no one speaks so loudly in there because there's nothing to echo off." He led them, or allowed them to lead him, which was the same thing, to a place where the water had cut a little lip into the dirt and made a shallow shelf. There were sticks and feathers and a smooth stone shaped like a heart left there by hands who had not had the strength to lift anything heavier. Jon knelt and set his palm on the stone. It was warm, as if a hand had just left it. "It's a house?" the Redwater boy said unexpectedly, kneeling too. "A poor one. A house made of a memory. There are women and little ones who have been saying the same name here for a long time because it was the only trick they had. We taught them to write letters in flour, and then the river carried away the words as soon as they'd made them. So they came here and set the words down as stones instead. It's a kindness." "It is," Bran said, and his voice was tender, and to Jon it felt like hearing snow settle. but it is also a seed. Even a kind seed will grow roots through someone else's locker if you let it. It will push the stone apart. It will split the bowl. What would you have me do? John said. I will not tell a girl there is no place for her mother's name. No, Bran said. You will tell her there is a place for everyone's. You will widen the bowl. You will turn this place from a cupboard to a table. Tables are more dangerous than cupboards, Arya said behind them. For she'd come like a scent through the swamp, amused and fond and wary all at once. People sit at tables and look each other in the face and remember they have throats. Jon smiled in spite of himself. He rose and brushed mud from his knees and went to gather men with shovels, and the 12 stones pair looked happiest they had in weeks. They cut the lip back and made a shallow sweep that would not gather stones into a wall but lay them out in a curve. They brought a cart of small planks from a village where men had thought to make a footbridge and made instead a kind of shelf that lay flat on the mud. They set a paddle on 2 pegs so even a child could smooth the surface. They brought a clay jar full of river silt and a little oil and taught the girls who came in 2s and 3s to mix it with flour until the paste held. They showed how letters can be written and then smoothed and then written again, and how the writing is a way of letting go, not of holding fast. The first day, for girls placed their mothers' names there and smoothed them under with flat palms and looked at each other and smiled shyly as if caught at a noble mischief. The second day, an old man with a face like a dried apple put down the name of the son. He had never spoken lest he call him home to die, and after he smoothed it he straightened, and he was taller in his back than he had been in years. The third day, a priest with the smell of salt and candle grease on him wrote a prayer without names at all and smoothed it quickly, embarrassed. It's only mud, he said gruffly, when Arya raised an eyebrow at him. That's all words are, she said kindly. Some men build thrones out of them. When the place had lost its whisper and held a new hum, like a spoon always moving in a bowl, they left. Bran lifted a hand in farewell that felt like a bird's wing beat on the cheek. He did not say he was proud. He did not need to. On the way back north of the Neck, they met a line of men and women walking like a river, in no hurry but also in no doubt. They carried poles with bundles and 2 children asleep in slings, and a chair upside down over a man's shoulder, and a hen that clucked as if offering historical commentary. They had calm on them. Calm is a smell like new bread. It has nothing to do with peace and everything to do with having something to bake tomorrow. Where are you going? Jon asked the man with the chair. To the sea, he said. We'll fish if the river still has its sulks. There's a woman there what can make rope out of eel skin, and another can turn a broken mast into a drying rack. The girl we left at Redwater wrote her name and smoothed it and said she would meet us when we had all written it everywhere else it needed to be. What's your name? Arya asked the hen. Hen, the man said, pleased. She keeps her head down during long speeches and eats everything treasonous off the floor. The laughter walked with them into the afternoon. When they returned to Winterfell, Sansa had company. The Vale had finally sent more than 3, and not because of fear. A woman named Ysilla, with hair the color of iron filings and a mouth like a general's, had been elected Hillswarden by men who thought she was too sharp to be bearable and found they wanted the bear's teeth on their behalf. She came up the road with 30 men and women behind her, a small weir of discipline with 2 bright eddies of gossip, and laughed when she saw the yard like a woman meeting a cousin she'd long argued with and always loved. I bring different weather, she said to Sansa, and she did like a wind off stone. Your letters have made our goats political. We have 12 herds now who insist on adding their names to charters and butting men who try to sign without them. It is inconvenient and correct. The mountains make fast feet, Arya observed. And stubborn spines, Ysilla said cheerfully, which is why I've come. There's a cliff village called High Tor that refuses to call anything by its new name and insists it is still held by House Wax and Tallow. The wax is gone and the tallow is rancid, but they have the signet ring. It's on a chain around the neck of the worst talker among them, a man with a jaw like 2 rocks disagreeing. He says he'll throw the ring into the sky and the sky will throw down a king in exchange. Let him try, Clyda said. We could use the sky's laugh. The trouble is not the sky, Ysilla said. It's the wind. When the wind gets hold of a man's words on a cliff, they carry too far. A girl 3 villages away began to dream of old lords after he spoke. She saw hers with hair he never had and a crown that won't sit on any human skull. Dreamed him for 3 nights. She rose from her bed twice and went to the cliff twice. The second time she almost did not stop walking. They went. Sansa wanted to send Brienne in her stead, but Brienne had promised a day to 7 women who wanted to learn to set their feet under them in a fight. And Sansa said promises were the only banners now and had to be kept. So Jon and Arya and Ghost and Ysilla climbed into the hills with 3 men who had hands like knotted rope and breath like bellows. The path was not a path so much as the memory of a path. The mountains taught humility the way good women teach children secrets they'll need. The world fell away on one side and presented a wall on the other, as if to say, world enough. Be careful of falling in either direction. High Tor was a pile of houses with a pride. They stood a little too straight against the wind, and their doors were painted in colors that dared the weather to do its worst. The man with the rock jaw wore the signet ring on a chain over his tunic and touched it like a boy worrying a scab. When he saw Jon, he puffed himself wider. "You come to take back what was left to us by a lord," he said, with a voice that wanted to be a bell. "I come to see it," Jon said. "Men like to be seen." "By kings," the man corrected, with a glitter in his eyes that reminded Jon faintly and unpleasantly of the way men looked at swords before they made bad decisions. "You were one. They say you were. They say the dragon bowed to you. Bow to this and tell me you see a house." He lifted the ring on its chain and it swung, heavy, engraved, the metal dulled by years against wool and skin. It had a crest carved upon it. A candle with 2 flames and 7 little teardrops that might have been light or might have been tears, depending on what you brought to the scene. Jon took it in his hand. It was warmer than he expected. He rubbed it with his thumb and a smear came off like old smoke. He could smell tallow faintly, like old kitchens and poor winter feasts. "It's pretty," Arya said, even, which was one of her ways of being cruel with grace. "I wonder how many throats it pressed into wax while other throats went hungry. It tells us who we are," the man said, and his jaw clenched like a hand. Jon turned the ring to his other palm. He looked at the carving sideways, then upside down. "It tells you who you were and who you would be again," he said softly. "And it tells your children they are something to be told, not something to tell. It tells them they are wax and tallow," the man insisted. "We have rules. We light the hill. Men look to us. We choose husbands in winter when the goats are lean, and we allot the first bread." "You can do all that without a ring," Ysilla said. "You can do it with a bowl," she added thoughtfully. "Set a bowl by the door. Anyone who puts bread in it gets to speak first at the choosing. Anyone who takes bread from it has to set 2 things in the bowl before they speak next time. Bread or a nail or the name of a man who needs work. Put the ring in the bowl if you must, but when you take it out it only tells you you've touched iron." The man looked at Jon with a desperate stubbornness Jon had seen in the eyes of men who had strung up banners when the wind was wrong. "You mean to melt it," he said hoarsely. "You mean to take it away and make it into something common, like a spoon." Jon thought of the dragon's bones with a candle in the mouth, and of Bran's hands folded quiet, and of Sansa's laugh, and of the Redwater boy's flower finger. He thought of Daenerys and the heat that had run ahead of her heart. He thought of a man in the west with a bowl of ears and a woman in yellow who had chosen to keep her sickles and her secrets and who had baked bread all the same. He closed his hand around the ring. "I mean to weigh it," he said. "Here." He set the ring on a flat stone and laid a small rock beside it. He placed a feather on the other side, and the ring did not move. He put the feather in his pocket. "I mean to melt it and then weigh it again," he said very slowly, so the man would hear each word in the space it deserved. "I mean to pour it into molds shaped like 3 spoons and 2 needles. I mean to give those to your village and watch what weight they carry. A man can feed a lot of house out of a spoon. A woman can sew a lot of house into winter coats with a needle. You can put a spoon to the lips of a child who cannot eat pride. You can push a needle through a banner and make it a blanket. Will the gods call that treason? Let them. I'll stand between. I'll see whether they can push me into the sky." The man glared and then looked at Ysilla with loathing, because she was laughing at him, and he preferred to be brave at men. Arya had her head tilted and her eyes narrowed. The look she used when killing a thing without touching it. The wind fussed with the ring chain like a woman with a ribbon she hasn't quite decided to tie. "We keep the mold," the man said suddenly, which was the sound of a compromise in a mouth unused to it. "You keep the bowl," Ysilla said promptly, which was mercy, "and set a little sign over it that says wax and tallow, so the old folk will stop kicking the door when they come in with a memory they're afraid of dropping." In the smithy at Winterfell a week later, the ring became 3 spoons and 2 needles, and the man from High Tor watched, white-faced, as if he were watching his own teeth being pulled. When it was done, he set his fingers on the spoons like a priest blessing bread. He took the needles and slid them into the hem of his tunic like knives. He went away slowly, turning his head often, and when a month had passed his village sent down a charter written in a woman's hand that said, "We are wax and tallow still, but only in the winter names now," and then it listed which spoons had gone into which mouths and which needle had joined which sleeves. "You can end a house with soup," Arya said, satisfied. "Men who want crowns hate soup. It makes them pee." The banks of the Trident grew fat with work. The 12 Stones men began to sing a song about gravel. It was not good, but it was very, very enthusiastic. The Ironborn began to trade eelskin rope for tar barrels, and the tar was weighed in measures of new salt from Grey Cliffs. And the Greycliff poet came to the assembly and recited his Reeve Thief stanza and then asked shyly for a permit to open a booth selling couplets. Sansa listened, deadpan, and said he could have one so long as he posted the rules for rhyme and meter for anyone to argue with, and he blanched in delight. Boredom, wielded properly, is a bridle men take gladly. And yet, there was always a yet. A mummers' show in Lord Harroway's town put on a play called The King Who Would Not, and men laughed and yelled and threw onion skins at a man in a wolf mask who kept putting crowns in the soup. Jon watched it with a sadness that tasted like an old iron nail in the mouth. The laughter was clean and gentle, and still he went away with his hands in fists because the road is long and even good laughter can turn into a marching song without any man deciding. The Braavosi Ledgerman lasted longer than they'd guessed. He stayed all winter and took careful notes and learned which women to flatter and which men to avoid standing near when the river thawed. He watched the Redwater boy grow into a man who could argue with flour on his hands and a reeve with a kettle on the hob and a midwife with blood up to her wrists. He wrote Bravo's letters about all this, in a hand that said his mother had been strict and his father had been a barrel maker with neat loving for circles. In spring, 3 ships came. They sailed up the Blackwater with a certain smugness and anchored with such precise disdain for the wind that Jon knew at once that whatever was about to happen had been rehearsed. The men who disembarked wore fine wool and shoes that would not survive a day's road work and smiles that did not belong on anyone's face near a dock. Their leader had a beard like a planned hedge and eyes that counted as he looked, and the Braavosi Ledgerman flattened himself on the quay gently, like a cat avoiding an argument. "Jon Snow," the leader said, grandly, and bowed with a flourish like a magician. "We bring you an offer. Braavos is not unreasonable. We see that you have built a new house with no walls and no roof. We admire apparent contradictions. We would be partners in this amusing enterprise." "Partners how?" Sansa asked before Jon could open his mouth, and the man looked at her as if surprised that the pretty painting had spoken. And in that moment Jon marked him men he would one day have cause to kill, or to feed, which is sometimes the same. "We have gold," the man said, "and ships and influence. We have a long memory and therefore a long patience. We can float your mills in a drought and sink your enemies without a splash. We can forgive debts before they exist or create them after they're paid. We propose a bank for your little villages, for your little reeves and road wardens. Let us keep your ledgers, and we will keep them safe from men with fire." "Who keeps them safe from you?" Arya asked pleasantly. "We have no throne," the man said, spreading his hands. "We are harmless, and therefore dangerous only when offended. We propose never to be offended. The trouble with banks," Clydas said mildly, "is that they are like leeches that have learned to sing. They lull you, and then you wake with less blood and a fondness for the tune." The Braavosi leader smiled like a knife politely sheathed. We can compose lullabies in any meter, he said. We do not come with crowns. We come with paper and promises. They weigh less. They settle heavier, John said, the old heat in him stirring. You would take our boredom and sell it back to us as convenience. You would call debt a duty. You would count your interest in men. The man spread his hands. If you refuse, we will go to your enemies who will accept. They will call Banner again. They will say we can only end houses by building one in our own image. They will be wrong because we do not marry our daughters to our ledgers, but you will have trouble, and trouble does not make for good roads. There were 100 answers, and the worst of them were most alluring. John felt the old dog begin to bark in him. The dog that had jumped to battle at a whistle, the dog that had run to fire like it was only another kind of winter. He put his hand on Ghost's head, and Ghost shivered and settled. We will give you no debt, John said. We will give you markets. We will list our stores and our wants and our prices and our offers. We will let your sailors sit in our assemblies and argue, and we will listen. We will let your banks lend to men who want to borrow. But our charters will forbid any man from borrowing on another man's behalf or from using a future man's hand to sign. We will not mortgage our grandchildren's bread for our fathers' dinners. We will enforce this with boredom. Our courts will read your contracts aloud from the first word to the last and set candles by the hourglass and require nods from all present at every third paragraph. Sansa was smiling behind her hand. The Braavosi leader's smile had begun to crack and show the weary human teeth beneath. He had not planned for murder by tedium. He had dreamed of strikes of dragons and thought to bring a little fire of his own. You can refuse to sign, he said, brittle. You cannot refuse the men who will sign in your stead. Once we seed your land with paper, the paper invites itself to grow.
Ariastretkid, Katlazi.
You can seed it, she said. We can graze goats there. They stalemated Bravos the way they had learned to stalemate everything that looked too much like a new old thing. Not by a single battle, but by a long, weary campaign of rules and customs and small, unforgiving kindnesses. They turned contracts into stories told in kitchens. They made debt something shameful not because of gods, but because of stew. She had to borrow for a funeral, the women said, clucking their tongues, and a stew appeared. He borrowed to buy a fine coat, and now the boy is thin. And a stew did not appear, and the boy saw what his father's glory bought him. Men who had thought themselves clever with clauses found themselves meeting midwives who were better than any lawyer at accounting hours and bodies in pain. One night, after a long day of being dull in an inspired way, John sat again in the godswood and spoke to the sapling. He told it about wax and tallow and about the Redwater boy who had stood up in assembly and proposed that all mill wheels be named, properly named, and why, and how the room had argued about whether naming meant house and how, in the end, they had named wheels anyway and written their names in chalk and never in wax. He told the tree about Bran's bowl and about Bravo's neat men, and about a small girl who had called her midwife aunt by mistake in court, and everyone had smiled and then remembered not to because the court needed to be court even when it was your aunt listening. The tree did not answer, but Ghost shifted and set his muzzle on John's boot, and that was an answer too. The gods spoke seldom in words and always in wait. The wait was good. Sometime after that, winter came in again like a house guest with a right to bang on the door. It lingered and changed the steps of everyone's day and made old men mutter longer. John's knee became a map of storms. Arya's breath smoked on training mornings like a small dragon jealous of the one they had lost. Sansa wore thicker shawls and took to warming her hands on the backs of women's necks, which made the women cackle and call her little sister and pinch her cheeks like she was 10 again. They lost Ghost one day to sleep. He went under the table and did not rouse at noon. John put his hand on the old wolf's rib and felt the deep slow in and out and then the slower and then the still. He sat down hard and the bench made a rude sound and everyone pretended they had not heard, because grief appreciates dignity even when the body refuses to give it. Arya knelt with both hands knotted in Ghost's fur and bowed her head and made no sound at all. Sansa sat beside John, her hip warm against his, and set her hand on Ghost's head and held it there like a benediction. When they buried him in the snow behind the kitchen where he had always lay to catch the smell of stew and calculation, John spoke very little. He said, "You were my first truth, and you kept me, and go on then." which was as much as any man could think to tell a creature who had outlived every emblem and still had never once cared for any. After, he felt oddly light, like a man who had put down a pack he had not known he was carrying. He slept longer, he dreamed less, he heard laughter in places it had not seemed to live. Time, with its pranks, made them grandparents without asking. Children who remembered only the story of a dragon came to see the skull in the crypt and left having touched it and laughed because the candle made its tooth glow, and then they went to touch the mill wheels and made the same noise. A girl who had learned to read with leather letters decided to beetle thatch a roof in summer to see whether it would sing in rain. It did. A boy from Skagos, come mainland to sell seal fat and stories, married a woman who made jars that did not break when dropped. Together they invented a marriage where jars were thrown when men were fools and not when they were faithful. A child who had dreamed a king on a cliff later drew the cliff with chalk and set a goat on top and rode under it. My goat, and the cliff all by itself ceased being a throne and became again a thing the wind liked. There were deaths that had nothing to do with war and thus made men more furious. The Redwater boy became a man, and then a man with a wife, and then a man with a belly that came before him in doorways. And then he lay down one afternoon and did not wake because his heart had been a mill that had ground too much grist. The whole mander wrote his name and smoothed it in bowls, and they named 3 wheels after him because wheels deserved names and grief did too. Isilla of the Vale fell on a scree slope and broke a leg she had always jeered at, and then her breath went odd and never righted, and she died with a curse and a laugh and a command to salt her words and not her meat. Brienne lived to an age no one had expected for a woman who had been built like a promise of violence. She died sitting in the sun with a cat on her lap, which Julian the poet wrote in a couplet so beautiful and shameless, that Sansa had to forbid its performance during morning bread for a week because no one could stop weeping. When Jon's hair had gone entirely white and his hands had become maps of their own, the lines not of fate but of tasks done, he walked one last time to King's Landing at the head of no army. He wanted to see the place where the dragon had lain, and he wanted to see if the city still laughed at the king who would not. He walked with a stick and a boy of 12 who had Sansa's mouth and Arya's eyes and Jon's habit of stopping to look at small things. They walked roads that had not existed 30 years before and crossed a bridge named 12 Stones with a plaque that said, "Built by men who quarreled agreeably." And when they came to the city and it opened its mouth to receive them, Jon felt the old panic and the old love and a new, sweet indifference, as if he had once been burned inside the mouth of this beast and now only wanted to see which teeth had been replaced. The Guildhall of Chandlers had a roof with a new lock of copper laid along the ridge. In the square below, men argued about tar and not about crowns. A potter with hands like spade blades sold bowls that sang when struck. The skull of Balerion was still gone. In its place, a wreath of clay dragons, small, friendly, ridiculous, circled a basin where people washed lettuce. They found the theater where once onions had flown. The company was playing a different show now. It was called The House with a Door, and it made Jon nearly flee, but the boy with him tugged his sleeve and sank onto a bench and shouted for the goose scene, and there was no escape. He watched people laugh at a door that would not stay shut, and he watched an actor in a wolf pelt kick a spoon under a table and then look under the table like a man surprised by his own mercy. When it was over, no one looked around for a king to see if laughing had been an indulgence they might regret. They went to buy bread with paper scrip that bore the stamp of a mill. On the 3rd day, as he sat with a cup of thin ale in a courtyard that had once held the last hopes of half a city and now held spider webs and potted herbs, a young woman came and stood in front of him, squinting into the sun, and said, "Did you really kill a king to save a queen?" Which was such a perfect mangle of everything that Jon almost applauded. "No," he said, "I loved a woman who was breaking the world with the best of intentions, and I helped her die. After, I tried not to remake the world in my own grief." The woman nodded as if he had said something about the price of nails. "My mother says you left us with work," she said. "She says it was rude." "It was," Jon said. "I'll apologize." He met men who wanted to set his hand to paper and call the paper history. He met a woman who called him a traitor to romance, and a boy who called him the best liar in any generation, and a midwife who called him a good customer because he had paid his share into the winter pot since before a boy with Sansa's mouth had been born. He met an old mummer who remembered the lines from the king who would not and recited them for him in a voice like a door hinge. And then the old man said, "I married a woman who did not like the play and wrote a new one, and now my sons make porridge while she writes, which is a kind of revenge on me that I enjoy." On the walk back north, John's knee reminded him again that winter keeps receipts. The boy found a weasel and wanted to keep it and didn't because keeping is a word grown too sharp. They slept one night under stars so thick it felt like being under wool. John dreamed of Ghost walking on the snow in a straight line away from him and did not follow because he had already. He woke with tears in his beard and did not wipe them. The boy leaned up on an elbow and stared and pretended, with great dignity, that he saw nothing. Sansa was on the steps when they came in, the ledger under her arm as always, the shawl about her shoulders as often now as her own skin. She put her hands on John's face and pressed her forehead to his and breathed the warm kitchen breath that always made the hall warmer without the fire's help. Arya was in the yard with 3 girls who would not be pushed around by any man, and she threw her stick to the boy with Sansa's mouth and he caught it and almost fell and then did not, and everyone did a little cheer that contained more relief than was proportionate to the act. Brienne's cat, granddaughter to the first, walked across the table and stole cheese, and no one scolded her because no one ever had. That winter, John woke one night with a pain in his chest that felt like the hand of a man who was only trying to be sure. He sat up quietly and went to the window and looked out on a yard that had held a dragon, and he laughed softly because the laugh fit into the pain like a spoon in a jar, and then he sat on the chest where the crown was and thought, "I should have melted you too, little circlet, but Sansa taught me respect for relics so long as they behave." The pain eased, and he slept again, and in the morning he called for the Redwater boy and gave him a new charter to carry that said nothing about kings and a great deal about spoons. He did not choose a death. Death came as it will. It found him at a table, with a ledger open and a stick across his knees and Sansa asleep with her mouth open a little, which made her face look young and foolish in a way that in turn made John want to guard this foolishness like a jewel. Arya lay on the floor again, not because there were no chairs, but because some part of her had always known that the earth is the only furniture that does not break. Men came in the morning and spoke in voices pitched for careful rooms about bridges and tar and goats and eelskin rope, and the little straw-haired sweeper girl, grown now into a woman with forearms like good bread, leaned in and took the stick gently from John's lap and set it aside. Endi Sansa woke and knew, and she did not cry until later because work is also a thing that deserves respect. They laid John in the crypt beside the dragon's skull, for it seemed just to put the last argument of a bad world within sight of the bones of an ending. Arya cut off a lock of hair and threw it down the passage, grinning through tears, because she said he would be furious at people making a fuss, and she liked to fuss even against instruction. Sansa set her hand on the stone and whispered a thing John had always failed to hear, and now would finally be able to. The boy with Sansa's mouth and Arya's eyes stood awkward in his new long limbs and vowed something into his own chest that had nothing to do with swords and everything to do with boredom. After, men went back to the yard and spoke in quiet voices. A woman came to ask about a charter for a bathhouse, because the old one stank of glory and she wanted a smell of soap and herb instead. The Redwater wheel turned. The Vale sent down another letter with a goat's hoof print in wax at the bottom because a goat had stepped there at the moment of sealing and Ysila's successor had decided to leave it like that for luck and laughter. Bravo sent a boatload of paper with holes the size of potatoes in the middle because moths had eaten the ledgers in an experiment with bureaucracy, and the ledgers had not survived, and the moths had. The Ironborn argued about whether a man could be called Old Way if he slept on a clean mat and woke because he wanted to, and a woman on Pike said loudly that the Old Way was rowing and fishing and not listening to idiots, and if a god disagreed he could take it up with her eelskin rope. In the neck, the bowl brushed smooth and smooth and smooth, and names went down and were wiped away and left their weight anyway. In Old Town, the beacon was lit at the proper times by men who had no signet rings and would not keep a key. They wore spoons at their throats instead. At Redwater, 3 girls and a boy, and then another girl learned to keep their hands in flour, and their eyes on scales, and their hearts ready for surprises like ships and banks and winter and love. At the theater in King's Landing, the house with a door ran through spring and then into summer and then came back in winter because people like to be reminded that doors mean you can leave and enter both, and the actors wore paper crowns sometimes and then made soup with them in the last scene, and kids shrieked with glee and men laughed with the relief of having someone else explain to them how to be again. A story ended and another did what stories do. put on its boots and went out to sweep the yard. It spilled a little ash and made a small, muttered apology to no one in particular and began again. And if any man stood in the yard and listened hard enough at dawn, he might hear, not bells, not banners, only the sound of a broom on stone, and might think, this is what a kingdom sounds like when it forgets to call itself one and just goes about living. And that man might smile and think of soup and needles, of wolves and dragons, of girls with sticks and boys with flour on their fingers, and go inside and wash and sit down and make a list of tasks and take up a pen to turn them into a day. In the far east, across the green lands and the faint remembered smell of fire, there rose whispers of an empire of paper, which men feared worse than fire until they learned they could tear paper and set it to better use. And in the frozen wastes where no man has a reason to walk, a woman with dark hair cut short wrote a story about a king who would not and a queen who could have and 3 midwives who did, and she set the story in the snow and it did not melt. And in the deeps of the sea, where no house matters and no god speaks any language we know, something vast turned over, bored, and went back to its shipless dreams. For even the sea knows a season for storms and a season for naps. The wheel did not turn. It had been broken, yes, and also set down. Something else moved instead. It did not have spokes, and it did not crush. Ticked, perhaps. It hummed. It sang when rain hit it just so. It had stools beside it for anyone who wanted to rest. And if, years hence, a child put its hand to that movement and asked the woman stirring, "What's this called?" she would answer without thinking, because she was busy, because names mattered and didn't, because life asked and so she answered, "It's called the work." And the child would nod like a person content to let a world be what it is and what it is becoming, all in the same breath.